Greg yesterday presented the slide that was really suggesting that the only way you can provide a ship with proactive what we call immunity to accumulating biofouling is the presence, firstly, of the right anti-fouling coating. So obviously that occurs in dry dock when the vessel's, in dry dock and applying the right coating. But thereafter, once the vessel or ship is actually immersed in the water, you have very little influence thereafter on age of coating, the type of ship and the ports of call, the speed of the vessel, voyage duration and voyage route. So you sort of lose control of that because the ship is doing what it's meant to be doing. And so we put a lot of emphasis on trying to provide that, the analogy of the COVID vaccine, in trying to apply the right coating to the vessel's designed activity. That's the best thing you can do. Exposure to biofouling, if you recall yesterday, largely is how much time a ship spends in port in that enclosed area, because that's where the biofouling and invasive aquatic species, that's the greatest pressure that the ship is under, is when it's stationary in port. And the longer you are stationary in port, generally speaking, is when the vessel's exposed to the most amount of biofouling pressure. And while you can apply the right coating to the general hull, generally speaking, you've got niche areas which need to also be protected. And there is a lot you can do proactively, but as we pointed out yesterday, despite best efforts, you have sacrificial anodes, you have docking blocks, you have certain areas like propellers that sadly are still exposed to biofouling. There's little you can do. So therefore you need to inspect those areas and generally clean them to make sure that you can maintain the hull at 1 or less on that scale we used yesterday. And we tried to provide you with some examples of different vessel types and different scenarios yesterday after 12 months, what levels of biofouling we were seeing on the general hull and niche areas. And the message I wanted to convey there late yesterday is it's a tough thing to predict. I can't provide you with a golden recipe, if you will. There's a lot of factors that interact with each other that is hard to forecast what sort of levels of biofouling you might see on the general hull and niche areas. But if there's one message I can convey to you, is that it's generally your niche areas that are unprotected that are going to be those areas that exceed that level 1 and 2 almost every 3 months. Sadly, it's a reality of the situation, is just biofouling will accumulate in those unprotected areas, niche areas. Every 3 months, they're probably exceeding that level 2. So it does require ongoing inspections, and that's why we're here. This is what this course is about, trying to forecast and then inspect and validate, and then likely to in-water clean, which this course doesn't cover in-water cleaning, unfortunately. It's another, I suppose, course in itself. So just to forecast this through to where we finished yesterday. So we went through voyage duration, voyage routes. We went through the examples here of the different levels of biofouling we encountered on these different vessel types after 12 months. Now we're up to risk assessments, and there's only a couple of slides here before we jump into the next module. So this is a little bit difficult for you to see, obviously, in the printouts, but this is actually publicly available. This is New Zealand's simplistic risk assessment. I'll try and walk you through this because as I said, it is hard for you to see back here. But it's asking sort of a series of questions, and it's a dichotomous type of or binary type of assessment. So the first one is saying, is the vessel's anti-fouling coating in service? So what that's really asking is, have you applied a coating that's designed for the 60 months that you're in service? And if it's saying that a vessel with an expired anti-fouling coating, then it's high risk. It's pretty much saying if the coating's not designed for the in-service period, then it's immediately high risk. If not, is the anti-fouling coating in the final half of the service life? So what that means is, say you have a 60-month or 5-year anti-fouling coating, is it in the 2.5 to 5-year cycle? If that's the case, and the answer is yes, is the anti-fouling coating less than 12 months old? Well, then you head down yes. Has the vessel been laid up for more than periods of over 30 days since the anti-fouling coating was applied? And if the answer of that is yes, has there been an in-water inspection or clean since the vessel has been laid up and shows records that meet the threshold? And if you remember yesterday, New Zealand's threshold is, are you staying less than 28 days or more than 28 days? That's what they're meaning by the threshold. And do you have evidence if you've undertaken that inspection? And if yes, New Zealand government's happy. So it's quite, you can see that they're quite definitive in the way they're assessing this. Is your anti-fouling coating less than 12 months old? And if you say no, has there been an in-water inspection and clean in the last 12 months that has shown the vessel meets the thresholds? No, it means obviously there's a high risk. If yes, do you have evidence? If no, high risk. If yes, has the vessel been laid up for more than periods of 30 days? If yes, yes, it's high risk. If no, it's low risk. So this is sort of quite a basic decision support tree, if you will, risk assessment that New Zealand uses, and they call it a self-assessment tool. So industry can use this when they're going to New Zealand and quickly decide what they need to do in order to meet New Zealand standards. So as I said, that's publicly available, that you can find it. You can even email me and I'm happy to point you in the right direction. So that's one risk assessment tool, and you'll notice, what are the two, I'll put this to you guys, what are the two things they considered as far as risk here? What factors did they use? Greg?
Age of the anti-fouling and whether they up.
Yeah. So Greg just said the age of the anti-fouling coating and periods of layup were the two factors that they were really drilling down on. So based on what we presented yesterday, how we're talking about speed of vessel and all these other factors, the two things that New Zealand used for their risk assessment, well, A, whether you have an anti-fouling coating, but the age of the coating, and have you been sitting stationary at any period of time, more than like 30 days. So they're sadly the two factors that are really important. So I'll jump to the next slide. I would love to show you this live, but I can't, unfortunately. But this is the New Zealand vessel check. This is quite a complex algorithm that has been around for 15 years. I was involved in its construction originally at the very start. And this is an online tool as a vessel operator you can log into if you're coming to Western Australia, I think Victoria use it as well. And you punch in your vessel details, where you've been, what anti-fouling coating you've got, how old the coating is, whether you've had an inspection, whether you've, your ports of call, and it will also spit out a result of whether you're low, uncertain or high. And if you're uncertain or high, that generally means go and have an inspection and or dry dock or clean or whatever you need to do in order to meet low risk. So that's an online tool that they use, which is more complex than the New Zealand standard because it takes more things into consideration. So it probably provides vessels with a little bit more latitude as far as their risk assessment, unlike New Zealand's. So they're two. I am aware of other risk assessments, but they're unfortunately like commercially viable or commercially used within oil and gas. So I can't present those, but they're two that examples of. Now the IMO guidelines don't present or provide a risk assessment at this point. So the only thing I can offer you at this point is out of all those factors, it's whether a vessel has an anti-fouling coating that's suited to the vessel's activity, its speed and duration, voyage duration, ports of call, and the age of the coating, and whether you've sat stationary, and if so, for how long. Are there any questions on that? Okay, well, the next modules might also help bring some pieces of the jigsaw puzzle together. So we'll jump into the next module. Which is planning in-water inspections. Here we go. So this unit just consists of one, I suppose, section, and it's considerations when planning an in-water inspection. So what we've been through is, let's assume that a risk assessment's been undertaken and an in-water inspection's needed to see what the level of biofouling is on the hull. So this is all about what do you need to consider when you're planning an in-water inspection. So the first thing that I always ask myself when a vessel or ship comes to me and said, Ash, we need an inspection, the first thing I ask, well, what's the reason for the inspection? Why do you want an inspection? Is it according to commitments that are stated in their biofouling management plan? Is it a risk assessment outcome? And if so, who did the risk assessment? Who was it for? Or is it for onboard monitoring, i.e. they've noticed they're burning more fuel and they want an inspection to validate it? Essentially, they're the main ones. Or the last one, of course, for Australia, New Zealand, California, or is it a specific regulatory requirement? And for me, that's the most important thing, because if I'm going to do an inspection, I want to make sure that it meets the regulatory requirements. So types of inspections. You need, once you know the purpose of the inspection, you also need to know what the outcome is meant to be. Is it species specific or is it a level of hygiene? The reason why I ask this straight away is because if you remember yesterday, I said that ROVs presently struggle to take samples and identify specific invasive aquatic species. So if the ship's going to Australia and going to a particular oil and gas project or Western Australia that stipulates 82 invasive aquatic species you cannot have, well, you don't want to go and organise an ROV to do that inspection because it can't give you the results you need. But if it's for a level of biofouling like New Zealand's standard or IMO's, guidance, keep it at level 2 or less, well, an ROV in that situation would be appropriate. So you need to choose the inspection standard in order to meet the outcome of what the inspection's meant to do. So it's either divers or remotely operated vehicles that essentially can achieve that standard. And when we're doing IMS, or what I call invasive aquatic species surveys, essentially I take my little laboratory with me, which is the microscope and what have you. I have the divers taking samples along the way, bringing them to the surface, and then I'm processing those samples, looking for those invasive aquatic species. It's quite a process. Yesterday I neglected to say, well, how long does an inspection take? For a 200 odd metre size vessel, it takes me anywhere between 2 and 4 hours to completely survey the bottom of a hull. That's quite a lot of time, but to be thorough. So if you're talking a 300 metre long vessel, that can be most of the day. Yep.
Is that a single individual or is that a team of people?
Yeah, so remember yesterday I said if any diving occurs, it needs to be on surface supply with obviously the camera communications. That'll be me sitting topside, communicating to the dive supervisor that is communicating to the diver to start at the bow. So it's one diver. And I'll show you later on how we actually inspect a hull. And that's pretty much from bow to stern on port side, go around back to the start, and on the starboard side, bow to stern. So if you will, you need a dive team, obviously you need a dive support, you need the crew on the boat and all that. Yeah, so it's quite a team of people. So to give you an idea, that's probably 8 people. So me as an inspector, dive supervisor, one diver, support diver and boat crew managing mooring lines and what have you as we do it. And that's on anchor. Now you can do it obviously alongside and pull up in a trailer. The diver can jump over the side, but it's very difficult to get, say if the vessel's berthed on the port side, it's very dangerous for a diver to swim underneath the hull, cross the other side and pop up on the starboard side. If something goes wrong, that diver wants to shoot to the surface. He does not, or she does not want to go back down, cross over the hull and come back. So it's a very dangerous exercise. And plus you can't visually see if there's vessel traffic and what have you on the starboard side. So that's why we always like to undertake diving, even when it's alongside in a port, via a dive boat, because you have the least amount of umbilical to the diver should something go wrong, and you have very good visual surveillance of other, what we call simultaneous operations, if there's other vessels moving back and forth or overhead concerns. The other question I always ask is, where will the inspection occur? And this is my little checklist. Is it at anchor or is it quayside or alongside in port? Water clarity. I've had situations where they've wanted me to inspect a vessel for example, in Singapore at Loy Yang, which is around the back of Singapore. Visibility is about 30 centimetres at best. You can start the inspection and then within half an hour I have to shut it down and say, sorry, I can't see anything, nor can the diver. So you abandon the dive and everyone's upset because we haven't been able to achieve the outcome. So forecasting that is very important. Tidal currents. We look at the moon phase. You have to look at what's going on with the tides in that area. In Singapore, it's changing because there's a lot of land reclamation that's going on around the area that's changing the intensity of tides now. And so looking at the moon phase and figuring out when the neap tides are is important, because out of a 24-hour period in certain locations, you may only get 2 hours dive window or REV window. So understanding tidal currents is very important, where they're going to occur. A lot of ports, ironically, are in river estuary areas. So if there's been a rainfall event that can affect sudden your water clarity or your tidal currents, it's important to know. I mean, this is just, this is Shanghai, and I've had to undertake inspections here and look at the water clarity. Yeah, it's just, so forward thinking is very important. Depth of water. I've had situations where there's only 2 metres below the hull, and it's just too dangerous for ROVs and divers to swim underneath to quantify the bottom of the hull. Knowing ship movements. Ports are very active. So as soon as we might have a vessel in front of us that we're trying to inspect this vessel, and then next thing 2 tugboats pull up and pull that vessel off, and the tugboats just churn up the seabed, and suddenly we can't see. Security access. If it's a strict port, it could be a defence port, getting access to that area is so important. The inspection window, what I mean by that is how long is the ship present? You know, a cruise ship might be there for 8 hours, but by the time you arrive at the ship and you do your safety tag outs, lockouts and things like that, say we rock up at 7 a.m, we won't be in the water till 9 a.m. It takes 2 hours sometimes to lock out everything, have permits in place. So then you're suddenly in the water at 9 and the ship needs to leave at 4 p.m. They want you out of the water by 2 p.m. because they need to prepare the vessel, untag everything, get permits signed off. So you only really get a window of, best 4 to 5 hours. Is that going to be enough for you to achieve the inspection? So knowing the inspection window, availability is important. Yeah.
Hi, so is it that they only request the inspections once in port? They can't call ahead or email ahead to have you guys and say, okay, this is our window, so that you'd be there from hours before?
Yeah. I love that thinking, that it's a perfect world. More often than not, I do try and forecast this for vessel inspections, but despite best intentions, people tend to live in silos and don't communicate very well. So that's, you know what this industry's like. If all the planets align, and I have had this happen with clients that we've done numerous or undertaken numerous inspections, they finally get it by the 3rd time, and then they'll have the lockout tag outs ready, and so when we arrive we can be in the water a lot quicker. But and it might be a case for a cruise ship, and this has happened. They say we only have an window of like 5 hours in this port, can we do it in the next port as well? And that's happened. So we'll do port side on this side, and when they berth to the next port, they'll be around the other side, and then we hit the ground running. So it's 2 ports. But it's also expensive, yeah? It's nice to have one deployment, get the job done, yeah. To some extent, this is more applicable to Australia because everything wants to bite us and eat us down there, is hazardous marine life. So Northern Australia, we have considerations with crocodiles and sharks and jellyfish. So, but that is a consideration as well for divers, but not for ROVs. And that's where ROVs are an advantage, is you don't need to worry about things that can bite you. What sort of information should be obtained about the ship prior to undertaking inspection? This is fundamental. I always ask for the biofouling management plan and record book every time. I'm trying to promote that because that's what the guidelines want vessels or ships to do. So I always start with that. And if you receive a good quality biofouling management plan and record book, a lot of the information you need will be in there. But if not, this is my checklist that I often ask, that if a biofouling management plan and record book's not available, this I always ask is, I want your voyage history. I want to know where you've been in your ports of call register that has your date of arrival and date of departure from every port that dates back to when you applied your anti-fouling coating over the entire hull, not just a touch-up, but I want to know when you went back to what I'd call virgin state, zero risk. I want to know that checklist because that tells me where the vessel's been and where it's maybe been stationary for 7 days, 30 days, and it builds up a profile for me very quickly of what I'm walking into. What am I walking into a situation which we can hopefully manage in water and clean thereafter? Or am I walking into a nightmare where I might as well say, you just go to dry dock? I know that sounds harsh, but if a vessel is wanting to go to New Zealand, which it needs to be squeaky clean, and the vessel's sat idle somewhere for 12 months, why head down an in-water inspection and cleaning pathway? So often I'll just say, don't bother, just consider dry docking and cleaning it. The other thing I ask for is the anti-fouling coating certificate. So that's the statutory requirement as far as the TBT convention. That's where they must have an anti-fouling coating certificate that demonstrates that the coating that's been applied on the hull is free of TBT. It tells me where the ship was anti-fouled, when, and what was on what's been applied to the hull. That's fundamental. Yeah. Yeah.
So regarding the anti-fouling coating certificate, one little piece that the California regulation added to that is request that that certificate includes the effective lifespan of the coating. So which is specific to every application, depending on how thick it was, what type it is. So when we go on board to look at paperwork, we look at the certificate, and we also look how old is, or how long is supposed to last, or how long is supposed to be effective.
Thank you. The other thing that I often ask for is the coating manufacturer's application report, and that can give you so much more detail as far as the specific coatings that might have been applied in different hull locations. But that's jumping sort of ahead. This is the minimalistic sort of list that I have. The other thing that I want to know is the list of hull locations and niche areas. Now, the only way you'll really be able to dissect that or learn from that is via a general arrangement. And what in your package that we've handed out, I've provided examples of this, and we'll be going through this step by step later on of what these things are, so you know. So via a general arrangement, you can actually dissect the vessel and figure out how many bow thruster tunnels and sea chests and these sort of niche areas. So again, if you recall yesterday when we did that exercise of it's a container ship, it's this speed, it's been to these ports, and then I said it had a relatively simplistic hull, that's what I'm talking about. I want to know when I'm doing an inspection how many niche areas I need to look at, because that is time, and it's also where the risk is going to be. A docking plan also helps. It complements a general arrangement. And what a docking plan is it's designed to provide engineers where they need to place the dry docking blocks to support the weight of the vessel. And with that, they often show more detail of where sea chests are, echo sounders and various things. So that's an important piece of the jigsaw puzzle. Overboard discharge plan, it's not always available, but that's referring to all the seawater that's expelled from the vessel and all those openings. And as I said yesterday, a cruise ship can have 100 of those, and I want to know where they are. Sacrificial anode plan, as I showed you yesterday, they can be populated all over the hull, and we need to see those. And then, of course, any previous in-water inspection or cleaning reports are also very, very helpful, just to get a visual and also know if it was cleaned, when was it last cleaned, so that might change your profile risk assessment. Are there any questions on that list before I go any further? Because I must admit we will be going through those. I've provided examples and we'll be doing an exercise with those that'll help you understand them. Yeah.
Just because I couldn't hear well the overboard discharge plan.
Yeah, so what the overboard discharge plan is, it's regarding where, it's often called a hull penetration plan, and it shows you where all the seawater discharges are over the hull. Yeah, and so if you remember yesterday I mentioned a cruise ship, it's a floating hotel, so it's got a lot of demands for fresh water for people to drink, but also cooling, air conditioning. And so the seawater demands on a cruise ship to support 5,000 people is huge. And with that, water goes in, water's got to come out. And so that's where all those overboard discharges that are on a cruise ship, you add up that percentage area and what invasives can be in there, and often the piping can be, you know, metres long inside that you can't get to anti-foul proactively. There's such a hot spot. And so cruise ships have been denied entry into New Zealand just on overboard discharges alone. So that's why they're so important. This is just an example. I'm going to go through this checklist now, just to give you a visual. And the first one was voyage history ports of call register. And this is often what it looks like. It's a big list. They'll often be numbered according to which ports they've been to. It'll provide the date of arrival and date of departure from each of those locations. And this gives me a really quick visual assessment as to where the vessel's been and has it had any residency periods or prolonged residency periods. And I tend to look for any days, consecutive days, that's remained stationary for 7 or more days. It tends to be my cutoff. So when we do this, and I know this is hard for you to see, straight away out of this profile, there's 5 times this vessel has remained stationary for 7 or more days. My heckles go up. I go, oh, okay, this is where it's been exposed to biofouling. I'm expecting to walk into this situation seeing at least niche areas being well beyond 2, if not being 4. So I'm already thinking for the client, you better prepare cleaning, because if this is going to, say, New Zealand, you know, you're forecasting what you're walking into. So this is an example of an anti-fouling coating certificate from DNV, Classification Society. Again, I'm sorry you can't read this, but we do have some examples in your kits that you can look at. It's stating when it was applied, or the vessel name, when it was applied, and the type of coatings that were applied, and the active constituents even. So it's, yeah, actually, if you wanted to look through your kits, there might be an example in there. I can't remember whether there is or not. I'm pretty sure there should be the example, the vessel we were going to look at tomorrow, which unfortunately has changed. But I think in your kits, it'll actually have the anti-fouling coating certificate for that vessel. Yeah, cool. Yeah, which actually might be the coding certificate from the coding supplier rather than a class society certificate. Just, yeah, if you just hold it up for everyone so you can see, thank you. It's this one here, it has international on the top. Now, I do need to qualify this. This is actually not a class society certificate that states that it's free of TBT. This certificate is from the coding manufacturer, and they always do that, that you receive a certificate from class and you'll also receive a certificate. And this one's useful. This one still tells me the type of coding that was applied, when it was applied. And so that's very, very helpful certificate to look at. Don't worry too much about it if you can't find it, because we will be going through an exercise. It's certainly not the same as this one. The other thing that I mentioned previously, yeah. Sorry? Oh, just ask the guys at the back, Lilia. They may have some more. Oh, Selena.
It's because, thank you. It's because there is no expiration date on the certificate. So how do you manage to know how it's going to be? I mean, the level of the protection, really, you know?
Yeah, remember we went through this in Galapagos? There was a representative from International Coatings at Galapagos, and we asked this very question to his, representing the coating industry. And we said, one thing that really irritates us is why you cannot provide on these certificates the life expectancy of the coating, because as we're learning here today, as Lilia said, is that we want to know that the coating you've applied is for the 60 months that your vessel's going to be in the water. And so unfortunately, the reason why industry won't supply that is because it's a commitment of almost guarantee. And the problem with anti-fouling coatings is they apply it to the hull, they do their QA in dry dock with the dew point and the drying times and the whole lot. They issue the certificate to the client, say off you go. Although they try to provide guarantees, that vessel, the moment it's cleaned or it rubs up against a wharf or it grounds, they lose their guarantee straight away. So from my knowledge, dealing with anti-coating manufacturers, they're so reluctant to provide that this coating will perform for 60 months, because as I'm trying to communicate to you, they don't. So it is a challenge that we're facing with the industry, and we are pushing them really hard to state what sort of efficacy they can get out of their coating. But I also understand where they're coming from too, is they lose control of the situation once a vessel goes out. There's so many variables.
Yeah, and that's very interesting, because that's one of the things that we have learned by having these mandatory regulations. When vessels started coming and we were requesting this piece of information, and they say, well, we don't have that. The manufacturer does not give us that information. And we were, well, that's mandatory here in California, so you need to get that information. So they went back to the manufacturers and started, well, if you don't give us that, we cannot go to California. And it's important. So we saw a pretty significant change in response of the manufacturers and the industry to be able to comply with California regulations. And now pretty much every vessel that we inspect has that piece of information because they know we require it. So it's kind of asking, like, by making it mandatory, we made the industry to change.
I think just to add to what you're saying, Ashley, I think the reason, and I have some sympathy with industry, with the paint manufacturers with regards to not putting the expectations on the certificate, because I think it's best case. So the way to think about it is it's up to 60 months. Like if everything is looked after perfectly and it steams at the anticipated rate continuously, which is, as you're saying, it's never going to do. So I think the way it needs to be thought about is it's up to. So when you look at the tin, it's not a guarantee by any means, as you said. It's not going to give you 60 months. It's up to 60 months, best case. But as people here have said, like in reality, probably half, maybe even a third, depending on what happens to your boat and what activities and operations you're doing. Thank you.
Lily, did you have a question? No?
No, just to add one thing, just because all the other certificates, they have like 60 months as expiration time. Why this one doesn't provide anything regarding, like, even as he said, up to is expect to, you know?
As just as a reference, just as a reference.
Yes,
Yeah.
up to 60 months, like all the other certificates.
Just a clarification from Lina. So if I understood correctly, for California, it is not enough for the ship to hand out the certificate. You need extra information. And is that extra information related to the performance of the coating? And if so, what kind of information a ship could provide in order to give you some kind of certainty?
So yeah, that additional information is a certificate where it says for this specific application, this thickness and this type of coating, the manufacturer or the dry dock certifies that it will last at least 60 months or less, depending. So we require that document in addition to the TBT and other certificate. And it doesn't have to be in the same document, they just have to have it. Something that specifies the expected service life of that application.
Now that's interesting to know. So you are managing to get information on the performance of the anti-coating over time. So
yes, which is different to the optimal performance of the coating, which is the manufacturer say, oh, this coating will last 5 years. But that's not necessarily true in each application. It depends how thick and in which parts of the vessel that coating was applied. So it's more specific to the last application.
Thank you very much. Very interesting.
I think that's interesting. It sounds sort of like buying tires that are rated to a certain number of miles or kilometers.
We don't hear you very well. If you can speak louder.
Sorry, that's interesting. It sounds very much like buying tires that are rated to a certain number of miles or kilometers. But in this case, that's the estimated lifespan. There's no consequence if that lifespan isn't met. It's just their best guess of what the performance is likely to be. Is that correct?
So in addition, we request the management plan to say, if you go beyond the expected lifespan of your anti-fouling coating for some reason, how are you going to manage? For some reason, you cannot go to dry dock as expected, or you're past your service life. How are you going to manage? Are you going to clean more often? Or are we going to perform more inspections? Or they have to tell us what is the plan if they go beyond that. But that's pretty much the requirement. We don't tell them you have to do this. We tell them you have to plan and tell us how you're going to manage if this happens.
So what you're saying is that once they present you a plan, then you can either deny them, send them straight to dry dock, or they can operate for an extended period. But my next question is, what period would you give them? Because I'm sure you'd say, okay, after a year, you need to go to dry dock.
Well, that we're going into a different territory because California as a state doesn't have the authority to deny the entry to a vessel. So we cannot tell you cannot come. But what we can do is issue a violation if they don't have all the documents that we require. But because this is a new regulation and that specific part, it doesn't align exactly with the IMO, we give them a 60-day grace period to complete the documentation necessary. So we give them a letter, say you have 60 days to complete this information and include that in your biofouling management plan. And next time you come to California, we're gonna make sure that you have all your documentation in place. And then if not, they keep getting inspected and receiving violations until they complete this information.
Okay. My next question is this information that you've collected. So when each ship comes with its anti-fouling certificate and the logbooks and everything, so once you get this information, you can then say, okay, based on the number of vessels that we have reviewed over the past 60 months, we can say this brand with this thickness coating, you anticipate the level of biofouling, and you can say, so if they said we want to extend to a year, you can say, okay, yes, that is fine because of the data we've collected, or you just go straight to issuing a breach.
Yeah, I think that will be very, very difficult because, as Ashley was saying, there are many different parameters involved in the accumulation of biofouling and the performance of each coating, like the layup times and the routes and all these things will make it really difficult to predict if one specific coating with that specific application will perform in a certain way. I don't know if that's...
Okay, thank you.
One more.
Thank you. I have a question. Is this part of a different process, or is it, for example, part of the port state control inspection? When does this come in place? When is the information asked?
So another piece of the regulations is that the vessels are required to submit an annual form to California before their first visit every year, and that form has all the information about the operational profile, the last cleaning, all the ports that they have visited since the last dry dock or since the last cleaning, and yeah, all the information about anti-fouling coatings and layup times, Panama Canal visit, like all freshwater visits. So we collect that, a lot of data in that form, but it's just one per year.
What I might do to summarise this and help you, because we're all looking for answers here, is that anti-fouling coating manufacturers have undertaken a lot of R&D over many, many years. They have a huge databases. They know internally, based on vessel operations historically and what type of coatings have performed through certain dry docking periods. That's intellectual property that they have in-house, which then they use to share with their clients for their next coating. So they will advise and say, well, based on your previous activity with this performance, we recommend XYZ coatings. It always comes down to the financial side of things, where clients will look at that and go, boy, we don't want this very, very expensive coating, so we're going to adopt this coating. which is, as the coating manufacturers say, yeah, it has the potential up to performance of 60 months. But in reality, no coatings I've ever seen can generally, apart from tributyl tin, I saw ships that were in water for 60 months, 5 years, that were still fouling free. It was an amazing coating, but it also had consequences on the environment, hence why it's now banned with the convention. So the message I want to convey here today is it is very difficult when you receive these documentations to find out the longevity of a coating. What you must assume, as Will rightly pointed out, that nowadays any coatings that are applied to vessels are expected to have the potential to perform within that period. But historically, and this is where Lena was coming from, historically we have seen vessels that have applied a 60-month or 5-year coating to their ship, but they've gone beyond that. For whatever reason, and that's a no-no. That's why we want to know roughly. So for what it's worth, the purpose of this course is I want you to understand, irrespective of the coating you apply and best intentions, there's niche areas. There's risk that's still vulnerable on that ship, irrespective of the coating you've applied, that warrants ongoing inspections and ongoing cleaning. That's the take-home message that I want to convey. But all this information is still important to understand just what you're walking into as far as the risk. And this is an example of an anti-fouling coating report that the applicator, the company, that in this case it's Hempel, which is one of many suppliers, issues the client. And it's a quality assurance document. It's saying we've applied this coating, and an anti-fouling coating consists of a system. That's the other thing. It's not just a coating that's applied once. So being metal hulls, you apply an anti-corrosive coating. Then you apply what they call a tie coat coating, and it's hence the name tie coat. It's designed to tie the anti-corrosive coating the tie coat and the anti-fouling coating. It's designed to tie those two together. So the tie coat acts as a barrier over the anti-corrosive, and then generally you apply 3 coats of anti-foul thereafter, and that ranges, we're talking microns, 300 to 500 micron. And so that's what that report will supply, and it also supplies where the coating was applied and when, and the drying time. And the reality is some clients will say, we don't have time, hurry up, get it out of here, and they'll often float the boat or the ship before sometimes the coating's cured, and that can cause all sorts of defects. This is just reality of the industry. Time is money in this industry, so there's a lot of pressures. So we'll jump onto a general arrangement. So I've gone, this is this checklist that if I go back just to visualise, this is what I'm trying to show you. I'm systematically going through this checklist to give you examples of them. So the next one's the general arrangement. This is my number one go-to, apart from the anti-fouling coating certificate, is I dissect this diagram. This tells me the niche areas. And obviously with a trained eye, you can pick these things up quite quickly, but I will show you through this exercise later how we can look at these diagrams and establish it has a drop-down azimuth thruster, probably has bilge keels. I can't see the sea chests here. It certainly has propellers, rudders, as it should. It has a skeg. So that's the side view, and this is the top view. And it's showing me there's a sea chest. There's another sea chest. That's the drop-down azimuth thruster, the bow thruster. It actually has some keels. This is a research vessel, so that it has acoustic keels, which has a void. It has 2 propellers, that's nice to know, and 2 rudders. So very quickly I can assess that the complexity of this vessel. What am I walking into here as far as its niche areas? So that's one part of the jigsaw puzzle. The other one is the docking plan. And as I said, this also reveals, and when I'm talking about docking, this is why I wanted to share these photos. When vessels go into dry dock, they must sit on something so you can clean the bottom. And this is what it looks like. They'll place all these blocks that look like this strategically according to support areas where the bulkheads are in the vessel, so it doesn't obviously damage the vessel, and it supports the weight. But once a vessel's on those blocks, essentially they can be cleaned all around them, but they can't re-anti-foul those docking blocks. And this is what you often see, is these strips. And this is an example. It shows a side profile of where the position of all the blocks are along the hull, and then that's these lines here where they're positioned. To me, that's also very important from a quality assurance point of view. That if we're going to undertake a clean, I want to know that every one of those docking blocks is cleaned. Now, a 300-metre vessel can have up to 300 docking blocks. And so that's very important. That's quite a surface area. That can add up to 20% of the submerged hull that's unprotected. So there are situations where Navy, on frigates, an example, will what they call fleet the vessel or bounce the vessel. And they must have what they call a double docking plan, which means that the hull can support docking blocks in alternative positions. So what they do is they put the vessel in, they drop it down, they'll clean it, anti-foul it, and then they'll refloat the dock, move the vessel 1/2 metre or a metre aft or forward, settle down, and then they'll clean these areas. And that's a huge saving in fuel, believe it or not. But the problem is you can never really get all the blocks because the keel is where all the weight is distributed during dry dock when it is settling on the blocks. So often you can't remove those blocks around the keel, but elsewhere somewhat you can. But practice, in reality, I've seen 3 vessels in my lifetime that have actually done the double docking. It's very, very rare. Overboard discharges. This is exactly what I'm referring to. So it's a schematic and it shows the location and number, and they're all numbered and their purpose across. So this is a cruise ship. So this goes to show just how many of these discharges, and they range from 80 mil to 300 and even 500 mil. Some of them can be huge. So yeah, that to me is very, very important. And there's some examples. And the thing that I'm really encouraging cruise ships to adopt, because when I first started doing this, there's 100 overboards. I don't know, I literally have to get out there with a paint pen and number every one to ensure that I've checked them off. But now we're starting to see them number them. And that's so invaluable from a quality assurance, because I can say we inspected 100 and number 15, 18, 21, 67 and 103 were dirty, go and clean them. And we can clean them and quality assurance it's been done. So it's all accountability. Sacrificial anode plans, they're rare. I often ask for them, but very, very rarely receive them. This is what it looks like. This is the distribution. It's a top view looking down on the hull. And this is the distribution of all the anodes. I know exactly how many there are. And this is just an example. I mentioned yesterday the types of sacrificial anodes. So this is what we call a strap anode. So obviously biofouling can get in behind the anode, and it's time consuming to clean. And this is what we call a block anode. And so it's actually hard up against the hull and the bolts have been cemented. So you're only dealing with 5 sides to clean, not 6 sides. And believe it or not, if you've got 100 anodes to clean, that can be a difference between an hour to clean, you know, so it all is time. And yesterday you were mentioning about impress current, ICCP, systems and the lack of biofouling around impress currents and what have you. That's what I was referring to. Often they're quite clean. Previous reports, there is an example actually I think I've provided, but this is another thing that I go to. I want to see whether the vessel's been previously in water cleaned. And this is ironically a vessel that was cleaned here in Panama, which was quite ironic when I was going through my archives and found this one. So yeah, this cruise ship had been cleaned. That's examples of all these areas, the levels, they've got their own scale, and they've got some quite cool schematics that they've generated as to where they've cleaned and the end result. It's quite impressive actually. It's one of the best in-water cleaning reports I've come across. Right, now we're going to do a exercise. Can you plan your own in-water inspection? So, what's the time? When did you want to have a coffee break? Now might be a good time. 10:40. Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I just need to dig out the exercise and make sure I'm on the same page. Lily, you have a question? Sorry, guys, we're just going to do a few questions while we set up this exercise.
Just quickly about the docking plan.
Yes.
So there are instances, but we understand that it's very rare that we could have double docking to ensure that all the areas of the blocks are cleaned actually, but that's very rare. So in reality, are these areas cleaned? And because yesterday we were discussing the safety for the divers to clean underneath the hull, I was just wondering whether in the real world, at the end of the day, these areas are cleaned or not.
Yeah, they are. So what we tend to do in Singapore with cleaning vessels is the docking blocks will, as you saw via that diagram, that they tend to be in a line, certainly up the centre of the hull, and then there'll be a row of them over a couple of metres on another side and then another side. Because they are all running so parallel with the hull, what divers tend to use is hydraulically driven machines with brushes, and they'll run the length and run over them in a long line. And believe it or not, we can clean docking blocks in like an hour. It's actually not that difficult, as opposed to a diver swimming around and cleaning each and every one. They tend to do it mechanically with a machine. It's very fast. So to answer your question, yeah, docking blocks are actually one of the easiest to clean. Yeah, because of these machines. They don't do it by hand. They might need to do it by hand when it gets a little bit narrow, and the machine's generally about 1,800, a metre 8 wide, so if you will, my height roughly, wide, and they do it in just sweeps back and forth. Yeah. Sorry? Oh, without capture too. That, as I said yesterday, a lot of the cleaning I've seen, it's all non-capture. So ROV machines like, excuse me, Hull Wiper, they can still do docking blocks because it's a flat surface. And that's where a lot of these technologies, these in-water cleaning ROVs, very, very good at cleaning what I call uniform areas of the hull. So it's fairly flat and they can rip, they can move fast and get the job done quick. But the moment you've got hull curvatures and what have you, that's it. Because they can't, A, provide vacuum to collect the material. You lose the breach, so to speak. So they lose, and or they can't stick to the hull and clean. So that's the major issue we have with niche areas, is while we romance that these ROVs are the solution, sadly they cannot get into bow thruster tunnels and overboard discharges and sea chests. You still need divers to clean niche areas. But these, as far as fuel efficiency, trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which the hydrodynamic drag is on the uniform areas of the hull and the propeller, bingo. These are the future. Yeah. So the exercise that we have is the exercise 3. Can you plan your own in-water inspection? And I'm hoping you've found that in your kits. And so there's a series of questions. Now, this was based on the vessel that or the ship we were going to be cleaning and seeing tomorrow. And the logic behind this is that we're sort of risk assessing the vessel in anticipation of tomorrow. But given that we're changing vessels, it's not going to be applicable to tomorrow's situation, but that's fine. We can still work with this. So the first one is that I've given a scenario of the vessel. I wonder whether I can bring this up on the screen. Will, is Will here? How did you drag this over to show on the screen? Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Yeah, right.
Then move it across.
Oh,
and then
bingo. Thanks, Will. Now, oh, hang on a minute. That's not it. Sorry guys, just bear with me. Oh, bingo, right. That's right. Right, now we're away. Okay, this should be the example you have. And what I'd like you to do is do this in your groups or within your tables, and so you can share this knowledge and work through these questions together. And so the scenario is that this particular vessel has secured a contract to deliver product to Melbourne, Victoria in Australia. So we're dealing with the Australian biofouling management requirements here. And it's due to go in mid-August, and the vessel ship is presently unsure as to what it needs to do in order to meet Australians' requirements. So the first question here is, what sort of information would you request from the ship owner agent? So you're faced with this situation where the vessel wants to go to Australia, it's here in Panama, it's dealing with the Australian biofouling management requirements. what's some of the questions you would ask of the vessel? What sort of information would you ask is the first question. So just jot those answers down in the areas provided. The second question, based on the information provided, would you advise the ship agent owners to undertake an in-water inspection? Please circle your answer and state why. The next question is, if an in-water inspection was considered the best option, and probably to help you, assume that this vessel has been operating in this area, Panama, for 18 months. So let's assume it's been in the water 18 months. So if you do recommend an inspection, would you use an ROV or would you use divers? The fourth question, what other information might you consider when you plan the in-water inspection? Now you're probably thinking, oh God, I don't know what to do here. But use the slides that I previously applied to this. This is the knowledge that I've imparted on you previously. Remember the checklist that this is what I go to? Remember the considerations that I would undertake before undertaking inspection? Look at those slides. That's where the answers are. I'm just trying to tease this information out. And question 5, can you identify and list the number of different hull locations which should be inspected based on the information provided? Now, I've provided general arrangements and docking plans. Now, I have to admit, I'll come around and try and help you because we haven't been through that. It is hard to dissect that information from the schematics, so I'll help you there. But have a go as well. Every vessel tends to have a propeller. Based on the information provided, do you think the ship will require cleaning? And if so, what methods would you recommend to the agent? And last of all, are there other questions or considerations you might make regarding the scenario presented? So you have at least just short of 30 minutes. So please use this time as a group to discuss these questions. Write down your answers. This is not a test. This is not a compliance test. It's just trying to get you to think about, if you are undertaking inspection, what are the considerations? What information would you ask? And I'll try and help you with the general arrangements and docking plans, so I'll move around. So any questions? All right, go for it. If you have any questions, just holler and I'm happy to help. For those of you who don't have this copy, you're welcome to share it as a group and do one copy as a group, so you don't all have to do it individually.
Hello. Voy a tratar de hacer la pregunta en español. Bueno, para darle un poquito de contexto a la pregunta que quiero hacer, voy a referirme a ciertas situaciones que han pasado en Estados Unidos relacionadas a deficiencias levantadas por los oficiales de la Guardia Costera de los Estados Unidos. El casco estaba cubierto de un crecimiento excesivo de organismos. Se descubrió que el sistema del agua de lastre del buque no funcionaba. El oficial de la Guardia Costera de los Estados Unidos observó un crecimiento significativo de los organismos en el casco del buque, por debajo de la línea de flotación. La tripulación no documentó adecuadamente las acciones de gestión de las bioincrustaciones, incluyendo inspecciones, tratamiento de los sistemas internos de refrigeración por agua de mar. Teniendo esto en cuenta y viendo las consecuencias de tener malas prácticas a bordo en los Estados Unidos, ¿cuáles son las consecuencias que pudiesen tener un barco cuando arriba a las aguas australianas o de Nueva Zelanda frente a los oficiales del Estado Rector de Puerto o Port State Control?
Yeah, thank you for the question. In Australia and New Zealand, well, I'll talk about several situations, and I'll start with Western Australia. Western Australia since 2007 has been managing biofouling at the border. If a vessel arrived in this sort of situation and it had excess growth or had it in what we call one of those noxious species on the vessel was denied entry. It was given a notice to get out of Western Australian waters, and obviously in order for that vessel to offload its cargo or do its work, it needed to come alongside. The only way it could comply was to sail back to Singapore and either in-water clean or dry dock and then come back down. That process was at least 3 weeks, because for the vessel to sail back up to Singapore was 7 days, 2 or 3 days in dry dock at least, and then another 7 days back down to Australia. So the opportunity cost to that vessel or ship was huge. So that's occurred in Western Australia for easily 100 vessels over the years. New Zealand is similar situations where they've either been denied entry or there's now diving companies that are cleaning vessels outside 12 nautical miles, and that's how they can meet the requirements if they arrive what we call unmanaged. So they've failed to acknowledge the requirements They've failed to clean the hull to the required standards. Australia has only just implemented in December last year, so they're only really active for 6 months. I'm not aware at this situation of any compliance issues. Australia is more along the lines of, rather than denying entry, issuing a certificate of non-compliance, which then goes onto a register that when they come back to Australia, they will be subject to increased border control, which is in no one's interest because it's delays. So that's the incentive there to meet Australia's requirements. So in the US situation that you're talking about, I would imagine they would need to adopt a similar sort of strategy to either deny entry or offer a solution, whether it's in water cleaning that's responsible alongside or offshore or that sort of thing. Hopefully that answered your question. Okay. Okay, guys, pens down. It's coffee time. So have a break and we will come back and complete this exercise after we've had a bit of refreshment and clear thinking. Maria, how long's the break for? 11 o'clock. So we've got 20 minutes. So have a break and we'll be back here at 11.